Прекрасно сегодня слышно. Ну чё, как ты сколько по времени можешь быть?
Но я буду до 8, как вот вчера я говорила.
До 8, окей. По сколько минут мы Диану возьмем?
Вот у меня как
Димка, ты ж у нас один будешь, Сашу все время. Ну, Саша меньше говорит.
Да, видимо так.
По 15, по 20, сколько? Дай по
Ну,
15, потому
давай
что
по
это
15.
Диана. Или можем вообще по 10,
Ну,
чтоб
давай по
красивше.
15. Ну или
Чтоб
так.
не...
Мгм.
Давай по 10, потому что Диана может много и быстро говорить. Давай по 10.
Мгм. Кто начнет?
Могу начать?
Ну, давай.
Давай начну.
Мгм. Потом
У тебя
тогда
сегодня
ты...
очень классный звук, супер.
Надеюсь, что и перевод будет тоже на уровне.
Да, все будет супер. Ну, примерно 10 минут там по...
Здравствуйте, друзья! Сегодня в
Hello,
прямом
dear
эфире
friends.
на АЛЛАТРА
Today,
ТВ
during our live broadcast on ALLATRA TV, in the format of the Game of Professionals, Psychology, Cognition of the Truth, we talk about emotional burnout. So, since the topic is quite relevant nowadays, so to say, not only it is relevant, but it is one-directional, in the sense that currently psychology attributed emotional burnout with professional activity of a human being. But is this true? So today we will also talk about this. According to world statistics, 76% of employees of different enterprises are exposed to emotional burnout. 48% of them suffer from burnout from time to time, so to say. And 28% are constantly feeling exhausted. So these numbers are huge, impressive. 76% of all working staff of population experiences this. Psychology has, let us say, a certain view of this issue, and it attributes emotional burnout to external factors like bad attitude among employees, lack of motivation, misunderstanding of the goals that the person and tasks that the person does. But unfortunately, the format which we live in is a consumer format. And when large corporations or even small companies in their strive to to their goal, and the goal is one is profit accumulation of material resources. So a person is used as a resource. And in many economical books, human resource is examined just like any other resource of economy. So in striving of using this resource most effectively, HR departments, or what was once known as a human resource management department, they implement certain programs according to which, how to help them deal with this emotional burnout and fill them with positive emotions. But despite all this systematic methodology and diversity of various events, for some reason, the percentage of people who undergo this emotional burnout, it doesn't decline. So what is the reason? So today, during our live broadcast, we will talk about what emotion is, why human being is apt to emotional burnout, and why modern psychology it has no effective means to help a person to get rid of this state. So stay with us, stay tuned. Please write your questions and comments. We definitely see them. They don't pass us by. We analyze them. And owing to your sincere questions that concern you really, these kind of programs come live. So we are going live about emotional burnout topic and does a person need emotions?
Да, Саш, я абсолютно с тобой согласна, что тема эмоционального выгорания.
Yes, Sasha, I totally agree with you that the subject of emotional burnout, to put it mildly, it's such a topic which has been discussed from various sides for many, many years. And this, misunderstanding continues. From the perspective which we haven't discussed it yet is from the perspective of a dual nature of a human, from the perspective of the primordial true knowledge and the knowledge of human nature. Today, actually, I've reconsidered many subjects in psychology and psychiatry based on this truth that we people are dual by our nature. And our true nature is spiritual. All of us have a soul, and we have a connection with the spiritual world. And basically, this is the essence of the human being. The fact that the human being is a spirit, a part of the Holy Spirit. This is what our true essence is, and not like myself is some kind of an egoist. And of course, such an approach opens up incredible opportunities and prospects for every person, and it actually brings back the true meaning into every person's life. And of course, we have to remember that each of us also contains a beast consciousness. Active consciousness is the animal component of every person. So without such an approach, without the understanding of the dual nature of a human, it's impossible to get rid of the emotional burnout syndrome in particular, because when we miss this knowledge, when we miss such a perspective of the dual nature of a human, this kind of locks us up on despair, and we find no way out of this situation. So today I will happily share how the emotional burnout subject can be disclosed if we consider it from this very perspective.
Yes, this is really interesting. I have actually, not counted on anything otherwise, because it would be strange if we spend this time, to deal with something that already exists in psychology. So, looking forward, okay.
Yes, and I would like to start with such a paradox in psychology, which actually we encounter all the time. There are people themselves and experts as well. Psychology ascertains that a human is born with certain qualities or features, and without those features, a person cannot exist. But these features, like congenital, inherent, actually bring numerous problems to a person himself and to other people around. For example, aggression or anxiety. Our science considers that a person cannot exist without these emotions, but actually these problems is what a person comes to and a professional to, and psychology then deals with how to help a person to manifest these qualities less. So when I understand all this, there is such an impression like we are some imperfect product of evolution. Something is wrong with us because, for example, if you look at birds, animals, fish, elephants, everything seems to be harmonious with them. But for a human, there are always problems. There is some incessant search of harmony which he cannot find. There is a whole list of professionals and experts who are supposed to help a person to find this harmony. But if you look at the result, the success is the only one. A human has come to a point to knowing how to destroy himself and nature around.
I would like to, know quicker and to learn more about this because why? Because there's such an impression. I really like this analogy with animals that are really animals more perfect than us?
No, I think we just miss some points which, the human is just more complex by his nature, and we kind of miss something in science, the key points which enable a human to be the summit of harmony, the peak of harmony. Sasha, I apologize. Let me also put an emphasis on such a point, because there is such a statement which sounds of insulting for an egoistic consciousness. How can we destroy the planet? But, for example, I would say the following. If someone doubts this, please watch the conference Global Crisis. This already affects everyone. It's a large scale international online conference that took place on the 24th of July this year, and actually it disclosed so many facts, irrefutable facts, that support which I've just said about us destroying the planet. And now going back to the emotional burnout, yes, indeed, all these are connected things, and I'll explain why I'm making some emphasis like this. So another inherent qualities which every person cannot imagine himself without is emotions. Any person will say, I cannot imagine myself without emotions. I cannot imagine any person without any emotions. But I suggest that we just look very attentively at how we cannot imagine ourselves without, what we can imagine ourselves. Like inherent congenital basic emotions are four: fear, aggression, sorrow, and euphoria. Basically, for every person, it is obvious that 80% of what I have just listed of these four basic negative, extremely negative emotions, there are people who are interested and who wonder. There are experts who consider themselves experts in emotions. They analyze them, but look attentively. All these emotions, any emotions, are just a combination of these basic four. And the feeling of guilt, some offense, depression, basically the states which consist of these four basic emotions. Any bad mood of ours is a combination of these emotions: fear, aggression, and sorrow. Can you see how everything is simplified if we know this? By the way, the word mood actually shows how emotions are concealed behind this very word. What is the mood? Actually, it's emotional state which a person is in, meaning it's emotions. If we figure out what the bad mood, we know that bad mood is always a negative emotion. But if we speak about a bad state. What is bad state? How do we define it? A person comes and says, I feel bad. What does this mean? Sasha, if you're bad, I'm asking this question to many people.
Okay. Well, actually, I don't know. Maybe there are two factors. So it is either physical pain or emotional state, also to say depressing state or oppressive.
Ну да, я с тобой согласна. Физическая боль.
Well, yes, I agree. But most of all, okay, I'll try to rely on my experience and the experience of people who come to me. Like, for example, those who come to psychologists or psychotherapists, in which condition do people come? In a bad condition, when they feel bad. And what actually any visit to a psychotherapist starts, that a person says that somebody is wrong towards this person, somebody is unjust, and he feels offended, or there is such a situation which makes him sad and traumatizes him. So basically there is some orientation towards some external circumstance, and this is the major hint which always sounds in everyone's head. If we ask a person what's bad, he says, how can I feel bad? How can I feel good if my son has quit university, I have problems with my work, etc., etc. But is this really so? You know, I would even take the example of a parable. We will try to figure this out on a parable. I like this parable very much. So there is a fisherman sitting on the bank of the river, and what are his thoughts? These men came, they cut the wood. Now that I have this log in front of me, if my fishing string will touch on this log, it will spoil all my fishing. Another fisherman came, and he also sitting, but his thoughts are different. What a good log lying in. If I took it, maybe I can use it for making a boat, and if I use a boat, I will go to the middle of the river and I can fish more fish. And he started fantasizing in this direction with such a positive trend. But the log is still floating on the, and there is a third fisherman who's sitting. He's looking, and this log is like interfering with you. If it hinders you in some way, just take it away, but don't scroll negative thoughts in your head. So what does a person say?
Because of the log.
Does it depend on a log or on some situation or on our attitude to this situation? This is very important to understand. And the choice how to treat one or another situation depends on the choice of a thought or some judgment which sounds in our head.
And depending on what we choose, that is the way how we treat ourselves, people around, and the situation. That's it. And it's very, very important to understand. I will remind you the process of how consciousness works. First, thought, a picture, image which comes in your head. In this case, a log was this image. It doesn't matter if it is an outer or inner image. Then thoughts, which we have chosen, comments on this picture, emotions, which correspond to these thoughts, reaction in the body and the action. And look, what problem formed? The problem was with one fisherman and with another fisherman. But the problems were different. And they were formed by evaluative comment. And this should be remembered, that our emotional reaction is not the reaction to the situation, is not the reaction to the deed of a person. It's a reaction to the comment in our head. Very often when I discuss with people in our discussions and during consultations, I hear such a word. And how can we exist without thoughts? How will I understand what is happening? But now I am speaking about evaluative comment. And evaluative comment, does it help us somehow? No. It provokes emotions. Look, it provoked emotions within one fisherman, with another one, and the wise man does not if he does not understand what is happening, and the wise man also understands what is happening, but there is no emotional reaction, which creates this bad condition, bad mood. That is the most important point, and it should be understood.
Did I get it right that, let us say, the main reason of the emotional burnout are not those external conditions in which the person is in, but exactly his choice how to react, what thoughts to choose, the thoughts that come to his mind in this or that situation.
Yes, you're completely right. If to make it short of what I have said above, let's define it this way. So we feel bad when we have emotions, in particular, emotion of aggression, sorrow, and fear. These emotions are the consequences of thoughts. That evaluated thought that we have paid attention to. It is the same what I have said before. It is a reaction to the comment in our head, but not to the situation or the person. By the way, about physical pain, as you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation. So if I have a real physical pain in the body, 80% of physical pain is emotional perception of this pain. 80%. This is exactly this comment. Oh, it's so hard. I can't deal with it. I can't stand it. Why do I have it? And these very strong emotions, which are followed, it's of 80% of pain that the person has. That's why emotions. So we feel bad when we are in emotions. So if we make a conclusion, the only source of emotions, any emotions, are thoughts in our head, which we pay attention to. That's it. Any bad condition that we have, that a person has, any condition, is the state of in these thoughts. There are no other reason for a bad state except emotions. There are no other sources of emotions but thoughts.
Okay, well, I believe that, the main pillars of the modern society begin to stagger, how is that? How can it be? I mean, all our life is filled with messages like you must search for emotions. You should, get them only owing to, thanks to emotions, you can feel the colorfulness and integrity of this life. And now, forgive me, we hear from a psychiatrist that bad mood is because of emotions.
Yes, that's right. And it's very, very simple. Out the situation, I understand. Yes, I know how hard it is. I observed it in myself. I observe it in people who come to me. I know how hard it is to get rid from this understanding that outer conditions are not reasons of my state.
Yeah, that everything bad is because of me.
Yes, no, not I myself, but thoughts in my head. And we are going to speak about that. That is the point. Thoughts are in our heads are not I. And we also should get rid of it for those people who really want to come to the truth, because we are going to the truth, because only this truth give us, for people who look for ways out of these bad conditions, first of all, to understand them, and second of all, accept them and be sure that it is true. So, outer conditions, people and consciousness really made them believe in that these outer conditions. So, for example, when we are dissatisfied with something and hear some comments, oh my God, what is this so bad, the bad condition, and so on. So, what do we feel at this moment?
Indignity.
And what is indignity? What emotion is it? That is the problem. The problem is that we have a lot of notions, guilt, dissatisfaction, emotional burnout, and we don't understand what it means. And the only thing that defined it, Sasha, you can define it. You have this experience. When something is wrong, then I get angry and I have this emotional aggression and I'm afraid because I can lose control of the situation. And of course, I'm dissatisfied, I feel bad, and I have emotions of sorrow, grief. That's it. There are only three emotions: sorrow, aggression, and fear. You can call it any way. So let's move on. I will continue to make a point. When I'm angry, do I feel fine? When I'm irritated, I feel bad, right? When I'm very anxious, do I feel fine? Of course not. I feel bad. When I am in sorrow, do I feel bad? I always feel bad. So it is bad when I have these emotions. As in this parable, it's very clear there. Till there are emotions of irritation came, the wise man felt fine. You see, the log was floating past everyone, but we choose. And we feel bad only when we start to evaluate, when we accept this evaluative comment that something is wrong. And then these emotions come, from which we feel bad. So is it clear?
Yes, very clear. But I cannot help but ask this question to you. So you talked about 4 basic emotions.
Yeah, euphoria, yes.
Yeah,
Or we
it's
have forgotten
natural.
about it.
It's natural, surely. It's good,
No, it's not good. That's why I say that condition when I feel any emotion, it's bad. Euphoria is a very short-term thing. It's just a flash, and I have it now. Feel good. In 5 minutes, I don't have it, and I already feel anger and other bad emotions. So very quickly, it comes to another state. When we distract ourselves from bad emotions, we have this euphoria, euphorical emotions and wishes, and after that thoughts. But it comes to bad emotions very quickly if a person does not control this process, but we do not control it. You see, I'm speaking about the things, and of course, I did not invent them. I'm just telling about them. They are very active, and science does not speak about that. And people do not talk about them. And at once resistance comes because people got used to perceiving it in another way. Excuse me. There is a paradoxical moment here till we move on. Look, by the way, you mentioned this. How can we exist without emotions?
Yeah,
Now,
right.
I will add even more. People get accustomed to the state that they are afraid to lose emotions. Without emotions, people is not alive. But we have just understood there are 4 basic emotions, and 3 emotions are very bad. And as for euphoria, it's quite debatable, but 3 of them are very negative. Everybody is sure about that. And are we afraid to lose this happiness? And now I have explained that all our states are them. So what conclusion do we come? That a person is alive is a person has bad emotions every day. The emotions which are so heavy, so unpleasant. Is it a person who is suffering? Because we suffer when we have these emotions. We feel uncomfortable. We want to get rid of them. So look, what nonsense it is. It is really nonsense. It's not just illogical, but it's nonsense. And we live in this nonsense.
Well, right now, when we focus at this issue from this point, this is actually very terrifying because, the most common wish for the world is, so let your life be filled with, colorful emotions. So they wish evil.
Yes, because the brightest emotion is fear. I said that we believe in some statements and without thinking about it, what we let come to our life. But later, these statements define our lives, they define our attitude to us, to people around us, to situations.
Интересно.
Interesting.
Мне хотелось бы еще уточнить один
Okay,
момент.
so I would like to clarify one more
Я
point.
сейчас зачитаю определение.
So I will just, read it, read the definition of emotional burnout,
Синдром эмоционального выгорания
and I'll tell you what exactly. So the emotional burnout syndrome is an growing emotional exhaustion. It's a mechanism of psychological defense, which is manifested in full or partial, deafness in response to psychotraumatic factors. So first of all, it's a mechanism of psychological defense. So once again, we have, covered this topic of defensive mechanisms of consciousness. So this is really amazing why it was put in here, in this definition. But I would like to say what is actually this emotional exhaustion. Because again, based on what you have said before, we can say that burnout syndrome should be perceived as goodness.
Sasha, you're so good. It's another statement which really is not logical. As science states, as psychology states, in this condition of emotional burnout, emotions exhaust. So I am not so anxious, I am not so angry, I am not in sorrow. So it means that I should feel better. It's a good mechanism.
Yeah, it's kind of like a proper mechanism of defense.
But it turns out just the opposite. So that is what now I want people to understand, not only we, and start to notice them. Anyway, if you ask any person, then any association with emotional burnout is emotional exhaustion. But the point is that there is no exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. In this syndrome, there is no emotional exhaustion. And there are emotions in a person. We found out that emotions are consequences of thoughts. Thoughts are in our head 60 thoughts per second, and the person cannot control it. It's an outer influence, and the science does not know about that. It does not speak about it. So further, there was an accent that a person should invest attention into thoughts, and then this emotion comes. Look, thoughts are in our head 60 per second, and there is speed, the same speed, and the person paid attention to them as before. Most people do not know what else where we pay attention to, but thoughts in our head. So what? No conditions change. So how emotions can what psychology pays attention to? First, a person mostly pays attention to thoughts and irritation about people around and some situations around him, and then he concentrates on thoughts about himself. Just an accent changes. But a person, as he paid attention to bad emotions and thoughts previously, and now he does the same. He lies in bed and listens to the thoughts in his head. Why he has it, and there are no wish and power to go and communicate with anybody, and the life is bad and there is no meaning in it. We speak about it right now, like simply, but it's really hard, and it's hard to listen to. These thoughts provoke very bad emotions, fear and aggression. And a person continues to lose vital energy.
Yeah, exactly. About this, I would like to, get to know more, because people who experience this emotional burnout syndrome, they say that there is a loss of energy.
Понятно, что человек,
Right.
наоборот, своим
So,
вниманием, зацикливанием
it's,
на определенных эмоциях,
depletion of emotions doesn't
продолжает
happen. A person constantly focuses on thoughts and feeds, these emotions with energy.
Тогда
Да.
истощается, да?
But
Да.
what exhaustive, not emotions?
упадок сил у человека.
Потому что истощается
Yeah,
энергия.
why this emotional breakdown and lack of strength?
Because energy exhausts.
Которые питаются эмоциями.
And the next question is what energy are fed by
Которая дает,
emotions?
я бы сказала,
There is only energy,
источник энергии.
the only source of energy which gives life to everything,
Созидательная
God.
энергия,
And
исходящая
creative
от Него,
energy, which comes from God, is called a lot.
человеку поток этой
And
жизненной
to a
энергии
person, the stream of vital energy comes from the soul to the person, to the
Когда
spirit.
человек вкладывает
But when a
жизненную
person
энергию
pays
в мысли
this
своей
vital
голове,
energy into thoughts in his
он
head,
тратит ее впустую,
wastes it,
теряет.
just burns, loses.
Вот это и есть эмоциональное
That,
выгорание.
that is
То есть
emotional
это сгорание
burnout.
жизненной энергии
This is
посредством эмоций.
burn of vital energies through emotion.
Вот что происходит на самом деле.
That is what
Просто
is
в
happening.
психологии под
In psychology, under emotional exhaustion,
утрату интересов человека
the loss of interest of a person is understood to his normal activity, to everyday life. But as I said before, the attention shifted from outer condition to some inner emotion, to the ideas about himself.
Было бы
One more thing I think would be useful to talk about.
сказала, да,
So
Извини, Саша,
thank you
можно я
actually
уточню,
for
потому что
saying
как бы
this.
немножко недоотвеченный вопрос получается. Ты говорил, что люди
Sasha, may I clarify a little bit because there is kind of unanswered question because people asking why I'm exhausted,
Да, потому что ты
Yeah,
why I
probably
lose
my
strength.
my question maybe I will not have to ask it.
как бы вот
Yeah, why people feel exhaustion, this burnout, burnout of energy through emotions? Because this burnout of energy through emotions actually is perceived is like burning of life energy, vital energy. That's why people really feel it as a loss of vital energy, inner energy and physical strength, a source of joy. That's what we feel, a person feels. And it's a very interesting point also because there is such a notion as psychic exhaustion. But there is no psychic exhaustion or mental exhaustion because psychic or mentality are thoughts and emotions, and these are the manifestations of consciousness. And consciousness actually gets replenished with energy when there is emotion. That's another confusion which interferes with people. There is no psychic or mental exhaustion because the entire energy actually goes to nourishment of this mortal information program.
впечатление о том, что
So, I mean, one could get an impression that quite the opposite is happening, so to say. There is, so to say, essential exhaustion, but emotional saturation. Because all this life energy that a person, through his attention, directs to this or that thought, it replenishes these emotions, nourishes it.
Yeah, definitely, that's what is happening.
Okay, so we got the idea about the exhaustion, but let us not go further, far away from this topic, but I would like to understand what psychology orients a person to, what kind of reasons of emotional burnout are offered. We have just covered a little bit of them.
Yes, sure, we should stop on these points and what psychology is oriented towards and how science orients a person to what causes, what reasons. These causes are quite determined for everyone. If you ask anyone, they will know, yes, I know the causes of emotional burnout is chronic stress at work. That's what everyone says.
Right.
So basically, people are oriented to some external causes. There is some bad work schedule, bad attitude of the bosses, bad salary, etc. So people are oriented to some external causes which are to be blamed. And actually, it's shifting of responsibility.
Очень жестко звучит такой ответ для многих.
And you know, it's such a rigid answer which sounds to everyone quite roughly. I say, if you don't like something, you can change it. That's the way out. Why suffer? Why go in for conflicts? Why provoke any emotions in people? If you don't like your work, go away. And now I hear another objection, an indignation. What shift in responsibility are you talking about in our society? I'm so happy to have at least some job, and I'm happy doer, but actually it is shifting of responsibility. If we have such conditions in society where we don't feel ourselves as living people, but we feel ourselves slaves, let's change the format of society, because we do not like these conditions. We are not satisfied with them, so who should change them? We should change them, because for 6,000 years this format has been existing, this slavish format, where from generation to generation these negative emotions have been passed. And these comments, how intolerable, how terrible this is, 6,000 years we have confirmations that nobody will create wonderful conditions for us from the outside. Let's change the format.
You know, I cannot but support this proposition because, you know, it's not the first time that we talk about this, and it is not the first time that the question of the creative society is raised, you know, so to say, in very topical for psychology, in symptoms, in diagnoses, in illnesses. But indeed, if we change the conditions, I mean, change it completely, in which a human being lives, then the majority of these syndromes and diagnoses will just vanish.
Yeah, sure. Of course. I hear the same comments. What the psychologists or psychiatrists are talking about the changing of format of society, because these are all interlinked points. This is all interconnected, and now we have this creative power from the spiritual world, this vital energy is creating, so let's direct it to creation and not to destruction of ourselves. So we've dealt with one cause, and there is another cause, which is actually, you know, it puts a dead end, everyone into a dead end. The second option, which psychology nowadays suggests as a cause of emotional burnout, is that people supposedly have emotional burnout when they communicate with other people too much at their work. Like they have this emotional compassion, empathy. We will talk about this later, of course. But what is also interesting, the development of this syndrome is characteristic to all for professions where rendering help to other people is dominating, like psychologists, physicians, social workers, firefighters, teachers, etc. But if we turn on logic and just think about this deeply, it turns out that we come to the conclusion that communication with other people is the basic of our professional activity, and help to people, they cause emotional burnout. So communicating with people and helping people, is it dangerous to our health? Can you imagine what a terrible conclusion this is? It looks like don't communicate with each other, don't help each other. We actually discussed this before the broadcast, on the eve of the broadcast, and we exchanged our understandings, you remember, and we said that any of our acquaintances, whoever we know and speak about this subject, all people name these causes, but when they name these causes, they actually accept them and agree with them, but an accepted thought is in command for action. And now let's look how we live in our society. What I'm saying is that these are all serious things, and we as science, since our science is in such a summit of the one that determines how society should develop, how people should interact with each other, psychology has this great responsibility. Can you imagine what we actually introduced to with such an approach.
Узнал об этом,
Honestly, when I found out about it,
профессиях,
that people in this profession, like say helping professions,
первыми, первыми,
they are, the first in line who are exposed to emotional burnout syndrome.
Я, честно говоря, было печален.
Frankly, I was very saddened with this fact. For one simple reason is that, there is such a postulate, and it is clear that the first reaction that, occurs after this is, okay, I will not just go to work in this field. I will avoid it in every possible way. I will avoid communicating with people or listen attentively to them. So, but we need to realize that those people who, despite this format that we have in society, and we again speaking about this notorious, consumer format where people use other people for their personal, needs and goals, and it would seem that a person who is in trouble, who is in a negative emotional state, or very unstable, he can't use a specialist. Well, it is easy. What it is called, a person needs like 3 ears, so to say, initially, but actually, in fact, there is something behind it much deeper, which is more valuable, and we talked about this already. But one more terrible thing is that in the consumer format of society, it begins to popularize that through these statements, that these postulates that if you help others, then sorry, my friend, you will experience, emotional burnout, apathy, despondency, and depression and suicide is not, too much long from there. But if your professional experience allows you to remember these moments, when you had to work in a clinic, and your state and the state of your colleagues, actually confirms this, so to say, strategy that is embedded in psychology. Well, let us say, even not sparing the fate of its employees. And what it is else is not consumerism.
I would like to mention another important point. This experience has every person. So we say that when we communicate a lot with people, we exhaust ourselves. But there is an experience when we communicate even with one person, we are so exhausted that we are very tired for several days. But you can communicate with many people and you feel very good.
For example, when you talk about the Creative Society project.
Yeah, exactly.
For people who are involved in this project actively, they really know, especially when you share with people you don't know, with strangers, and what kind of response arises in people when they get to know about this information. About this project.
Yes, Sasha. But anyway, I understand that our viewers will have questions. So we lose power. We lose power when we communicate with people. So let's figure out why we lose power when we communicate with another person. The point is, there is communication on a visible level, and there is communication on energetical level. And from this communication, everything begins. But to understand how it happens, we also should remember about dual nature of a human. Understanding that human being is construction in the form of pyramid, where body is just a part of this pyramid, and the face of this pyramid are energetical essences. They are called this way. Depending on how they are on our body, there are 4 phases. the right, the left, the front, and the backward. And the function of these energetical essences is to bring the information about what is happening in the material world. Through these essences, we get the information at the first place.
So it is before a person says something.
Yes, exactly. And the personality of a human, I am speaking about personality as a spirit, it can perceive this information through feelings. And the personality which is not developed, which does not understand who he or she is, it gets information through the mediator, which is called consciousness. But consciousness is an intellectual structure. It has reasons, aims and tasks. And these aims and tasks are completely opposite to tasks and aims of a personality. In this case, consciousness is like a bad interpreter. It gives information which is very distorted, and consciousness benefits from it. And look, emotions are like whatever comment you have is some dissatisfaction. As a result of this interpretation of this interpreter, we always are in a state, in a bad state, in a state that we are dissatisfied with everything. This is a simple proof. So why does it do it? I understand it can be like information now. It can sound complicated, but I will explain it on a simple example. Why, for example, when we talk about burnout syndrome, we first of all mention such professions as doctors, lawyers, firefighters, psychologists. Psychologists are on the first place, on the first line. Psychotherapists are also there. Why is it so? Because people of these professions are very often communicate with people who are in a condition of anxiety, fear, despair, hopelessness, aggression, vivid aggression, and people are in emotions, in very strong emotions. And look how this interconnection occurs. The essence just gets this information from a person that a person came. That's it.
So as far as I understand, this essence, gets this information without distortion, regardless of what the person would, say with his words, try to sell to a specialist, but the essence will convey everything as it is.
Yeah, essence just reads this information, but as we cannot use this mechanism, we cannot develop them. 99% of people do not even understand that they have this energetic construction. Consciousness very quickly gets this information and brings it to a specialist in such interpretation so that provokes the same emotions that a patient has. For example, I will speak about psychologists and psychotherapists. For example, a mother which has a problem with her child, and she came crying, and she explains that something wrong happened to my child, and I can't come down, I don't know what to do. And there are so many emotions that it can last for a long time. So the essence just informs that a person is in grief, in fear, in aggression. That's it. Just brings this information. And what will conscious do? For example, a person has this also a child, and conscious starts to bring these pictures. Look, yesterday this mother was happy, but today there is a problem, and it happens to you also tomorrow. And this psychologist also already has these pictures that something is wrong with the child, and the specialist listens to these thoughts. Will he be afraid? Any mother, any specialist, one thought about bad condition of a child can bring this person into this condition. That is a simple example. For example, there is no child, just a person sitting and telling about the loss of a very close person, or how he suffers that there are no family relationships in the family. And the specialist also has close people, and there are also family relationships, which are also not ideal. as with this patient, and that's it. And consciousness starts to bring thoughts about these particular situations, which are about this person, about this specialist. You see, that is what is happening. I speak about these distortions, and you see what comes out to suffering people. So you should understand this. Each person suffers from that they hear thoughts in their heads.
So, in other words, simply speaking, there is an emotional contamination occurs. And as far as I understand, again, correct me please if I have no experience, unlike you. I mean, yours like very this large professional experience. Does psychology or medicine, in its own way, the education does not offer it, but does it offer any methods of proper protection? Even today, empathy is one of the most demanded traits in these social spheres. I mean, where people have to communicate, with children and so on, because people are trying to find someone with empathy because he should empathize with me. He should leave those emotions. And what has happened? There's a contamination with these emotions. So I'll go back to the everyday level, so to say. I will just I like the analogy that you described in communication. There's a client came and told about this negative situation to that specialist, and in order to solve it. And how do we communicate in reality in everyday life? We talk about how poor I am and unfortunate I am. I have a bad time doing this and so on. But the first reaction, even remember myself in this kind of communication, I speak to the person like an identical, oh, you have a bad thing, but I have it even worse. So my day should have started like in this way, but it started not the way I wanted.
You see this analogy because our consciousness starts to give you these situations which will bring you the same emotions. And you know what I often hear? The comment from people. So, compassionate, it's not so good. Empathy is not so good. People say, how can it be? So, should I be senseless? But I offer not to confuse these things. I will comment once again in this situation so that you will understand it better. Yes, I will explain. Not to confuse emotions and feelings. What does it mean, empathy? People understand it like compassionate, as what happens to people around. But does a specialist worry about what has happened to another person? No. He worries about similar situations, how consciousness comments. Look, how terrible it is if something bad happened to your child or to your parents or something like that. You will be in the same sufferings or even worse. And a person suffers that it can happen to him. Let's not forget who hints that, who is an interpreter. Consciousness is selfish. It's great selfish. It cannot think about anybody or care about anybody. Maybe in some point if it benefits. So you should understand that consciousness is a beast inside us, what I mentioned in the beginning. Our spiritual nature, our ability to support a person, to understand a person, it's not in the consciousness. So there is a compassion when we suffer together, when everyone suffers within themselves. But there is also a feeling that we have together, co-feeling, when we feel something together. When a person is in feeling of love, it's a very calm feeling in support, in understanding. Why support and understanding? Because there is no evaluative comment. There is no. Why there is no evaluative comment? Because because there is no attention in evaluative thoughts. And this condition is very deep. This condition of very deep calmness and peace. And by the way, the construction also reacts to this. And there is a front essence. And when it is active in our construction, it can stop the work of others. And when there is such person nearby, there is interconnection with this person, interinduction, and this it can help another person to get out of this condition. Everyone knows this. When we're anxious or irritated, when we feel bad, if there is another person, a calm person nearby, we feel better, right? This is an interconnection. He doesn't even say anything. I noticed it many times during my consultations. Just enough is to be. You don't even have to speak anything, and the person comes down. This is a very strong state, and this is a state of support and comfort of another person.
This is a very good, definition and comparison between the compassion and sympathy, because co-suffering, co-feeling, because a person really suffers from emotion. There are four basic emotions that you have voiced today, and when you realize what the feeling is, that besides love and joy, person cannot experience anything. And this is so much amazing and so wonderful. This sympathy, this co-feeling, because except love, you feel you cannot feel but love. So this accent is like really significant here. So I'm sorry again, I'm not a specialist, not an expert, but in our reality of the consumer format of society, when you hear from a specialist this thing, about empathy, you risk, losing an audience, so to say, huh? But the thing is that people don't really understand what is behind these definitions. And the trouble is that they're like, sometimes like blind kittens, they strive to something they don't understand what.
Yes, you mentioned the audience, Sasha, but actually this chasing of audience is actually this consumerist approach. What is the purpose of a physician or whoever person has to chase for some people, clients or audience, or to help another person? For me, it's thank God this emphasis is already not pickle for me to get the audience, to get more clients. And also another point, it's very interesting. When we talk to each other, I actually suggest that we should observe how we communicate, how we talk. What actually is exhaustion in communication with another person? If we look attentively how we communicate, we barely hear another person. A person just says a couple of words, not even finish the sentence, but we already have some ready-made answers, some comments in our heads. We are ready to object, to explain why he or she is wrong. And this way, consciousness actually seizes some separate phrases and has some comment to them. So who do we communicate with at the moment? We actually communicate more with the commentator in our head, and actually a desire to interrupt, to object is the desire which does not arise when we are calm. It's a desire to dominate, it's a desire to prove one's rightness, that I'm better, I'm more significant. This is aggression, this is fear. These are these emotions. And who pushes us to this? Not another person, but comments in our head. So if we talk about communication, this is what we often encounter and observe. We more, it's not people who exhaust us, but these talks and chatters in our head. This is a very important point, an interesting one. Basically, you mentioned several times that professionals and people, they defend their position. But unfortunately, what I've been talking about today, people will not read in the books on psychology. And the professionals in psychology are not taught to defend themselves from negative influence. Basically, they do not even know how to cope with the emotional burnout syndrome. They wrote about this syndrome by observing his own emotional exhaustion, because these specialists are in the first lines of those who are susceptible to this burnout. So people who really want to figure out how this energy interaction takes place, what this energy structure is, how it works and how to control it, basically to figure out the main points, the main answer to the main question, who am I as a human? And how to learn to protect myself from any negative influence. I suggest to those people who are interested to read the book *ALLATRA and watch the videos with Igor Mikhailovich Danilov. And now I suggest that we all view a fragment of the video, The Shield, which where Igor Mikhailovich explains how communication between people take place and what is the purpose of such communication consciousness.
Let's sort this out. Here is a simple example. Two selfish people are standing and talking to each other. One selfish person says, "I've had such a pain today," he says, for example, in the liver. The other one says, "That's nothing but my headache." And both immediately lose interest in the conversation. Why? Nobody listens to anybody. Everyone tells about their own sore. Well, how many times have we seen that? If someone listens about another sore spot, it means he's a good person, right? He listens about your sore spot. So he's a good, easygoing person. Why? Because this way you dominate him. Whereas if he immediately interrupts you and starts telling you about his own problems, it means he's a bad person. He is...
It's in your nature to be sympathetic. You are not selfish, right?
You are, yes.
That is, you can share pain with another person.
Of course, sure.
And by the way, it is interesting, this point about listening and speaking. Let's suppose, if we dig deeper, it turns out that when a person listens, he gives his time and attention, doesn't he?
Well, it depends. For example, even in the case of idle talk, or when someone complains, if you're not a doctor, for instance, while he's telling you how bad he felt and so on, the person confuses things. He has met an acquaintance and forgot that he's not a doctor, and he wants to complain. Why does he do that? To attract attention to himself. Another person, if he's smarter, he listens for propriety's sake. Well, why quarrel with an acquaintance or, let's say, an employee or a colleague at work? But at the same time, he solves his task in his head, just nodding.
And it's also very interesting.
Then it's the right position.
Yes.
He remains as if good and attentive
A good interlocutor.
to this person, but at the same time, he doesn't waste his life on empty things. Yet, what is the real fight going on for? If we put everything aside and look carefully, my friends, what do you think all of us fight for? For each other's attention, for someone's life. After all, for example, I'll start telling you about my source now. You will listen to me carefully, nod your head and think, how? I have my own problems, but you are wasting your time, you are wasting your life, listening to me, to this stupidity. About my source, something else, do you need them? No, you don't, because you're not a doctor.
In this regard, I just wanted to add that this is also the question that is asked in the comments, right? What we got in the letters was that when you said something and the person didn't react emotionally to what you said, just didn't give you the necessary amount of attention, and then there is this kind of dissatisfaction, or, well, first dissatisfaction, and then maybe I've said something wrong, and such doubts.
Humiliation from the system.
Well, that's how relationships go bad.
And why?
Because of the fact that selfishness hasn't got fulfilled.
No, here the work of the system is actually very simple. It's clear, you're saying it right, that selfishness hasn't got fulfilled, but for people to understand, we need to put this simpler. Your consciousness has decided to dominate my consciousness. It attracts with the theme of your own selfishness. That is, I have to invest my attention, spend my time, listen to you, sympathize and the like. But I didn't do that. It means that consciousness has spent its energy. It is something from outside that only wants to eat. There is nothing sacred for it, no love for humankind. It's a banal program that devours a lot, and devours endlessly, no matter how much you give it. But it has spent a little bit on you, hasn't it? On the fact that you're trying to dominate me. At that time, I didn't react. It wants to take what? Its own. It never wants to work at a loss. What will it do? It will humiliate you as a personality. You're not interesting, you have failed, and so on. That is, there are accusations in your direction. Well, it's here, there, and everywhere. So, if it failed to eat the other one, you didn't work as a conductor at this given moment, so it will eat you.
From the inside, yes.
Far and wide, of course, blaming it all on you.
And here too, Igor Mikhailovich, there are a lot of questions and answers on the internet now, and even entire fields of science, psychohygiene, regarding the fact that people feel somewhat tired after communication with each other. They describe that state as a squeezed lemon.
Surely.
The fact that, and how to shield themselves from it, and what kind of phenomenon is it, and this is, well, as if it appears all the time in some groups, in families and at work, and people are just afraid of communicating with each other, in fact.
We've just discussed this. It's a distribution of life, let's call it so, whatever it is called. Vital energy, something else, prana, alat, it doesn't matter. It's a substance, so to speak, which is life. And this redistribution of this substance among people, constant taking it away from someone because it's not needed. It is one thing to have business relations or something else, but often it's just a provocation of emotion, a challenge, an attraction of attention, an investment of attention, and so on. Or as they say, cultural communication, right? But what's the point of it? To eat each other. Everything is very simple. That's why people feel extremely unpleasant after having communicated.
Хороший фрагмент,
A really great fragment, which actually very vividly and, in essence, essentially explains everything that happens during the process of communication between people, when they talk to each other, especially for this category of experts, professionals who are indeed, it is their duty, to help people get out of stressful situations, to save their lives, not only by physical impact, interaction, but also communicating with people. So the knowledge of Allatra, they are really precious, they are priceless. They are capable of saving human life, and not only in the physical sense, but, in this analogy, with these simple words, which Igor Mikhailovich always uses to convey this truth, they, just remove all this superficial, things, and they just give a person a chance for a normal life, without falling into any negative states. Because, even the moment of a person being in these states really makes the life difficult.
Yes, indeed, we say, like, I'm in terrible condition, I feel so bad, oh, I'm in normal condition, I'm good, I'm fine. But we never think what defines our state or condition. Basically, our state is what I consist of, what I'm filled with. And a human, due to his dual nature, I go back to this again because it's impossible to omit this. A person can feel not just emotions, but also feelings. And exactly due to human dual nature. And that's the major difference of a human, unlike animals. So a person can be filled either with feelings or with emotions. We have already determined that any conditions like I'm bad, I'm suffering, and when a person is unhappy, it's when a person feels or experiences emotions. When we are bad, we have emotions and we feel bad. And what does it mean to be in a happy state? I'm not saying such, joyful state when you bought a new car or you met some very important person. Tomorrow you will lose this person and you will have grief despair and happy in relationship will finish a couple of days later. But I'm talking about the real joy and happiness, which does not depend on any external circumstances. When you are happy so much that you are ready to embrace the entire world and you do not have any desires, because in this state you have everything. In this state, this very state is actually that most important which you need. It's just there. It's the most necessary which you are looking for and what you found. That's what I'm saying right now. And this state, this real state of happiness, in this state, a person can be only when he's in feelings, because feelings is actually only love, happiness, and joy, nothing more. That's a very important point to understand. And also, there is another very important and interesting element or aspect, because feelings and emotions have their source. In order for me to understand what condition or what state I should be, I should understand the source of my good or bad condition and how to choose this condition, because a person actually chooses in what state to be. Thoughts and emotions, we mentioned that these are manifestations of consciousness. Emotions come from consciousness. And like indirectly, science mentions this, but not clearly. But what about the source of feelings? Psychology rejected the soul, rejected the concept of soul, so it doesn't have an understanding of a dual human nature. Science has lost the understanding of the real meaning of human life. But a human can feel only thanks to the soul, to his connection with God, because feelings is the language in which a human communicates with God, and it's the only truthful language. So you see how everything is in its place right away. That's the difference between emotions and feelings.
So the difference is not only, well, so to say, in terms of definitive conceptual point, but what we are talking about today, including today, the information that consciousness is an energy and information structure that is just a program that has its own algorithms which it acts upon, and that consciousness is just a part of the whole structure of a human being. So the information of this is present, and happy enough, it's proven scientifically. But the trouble is that these scientific facts and proofs, alas, they are not, brought to the public display, so to say. I mean, I cannot say that they are ignored, but they are silenced for some reason. And science does not carry them, to the postulates that it actually conveys for centuries. I'm talking about psychology in specific. So it says that aggression is normal, and we already said that it's a derivative of construction, and that emotional burnout is a consequence of some external circumstances, and it cannot explain that what exactly burns out, because certain emotions are produced again, generated, So in this regard, for me and for many other people, a very significant conference that took place in May of this year on the platform of International Public Movement ALLATRA. This conference was named Life After Death, because those facts and the amount of experts from various fields, from medical clinicians, psychiatrists, neurosurgeons, who, devoted themselves to decades of research, and they already proved that consciousness is not a product of brain activity, and that thoughts do not live in a brain. They are not generated there. And already after this conference, when people, joined in from Latin America, from North America, Japan, Europe, Africa, they all spoke about the same thing. But they talked about it in a certain, field which of their study, and they presented irrefutable facts. So right now, we can, calmly talk about it. I mean, we spoke it generally calmly before, but thanks to the knowledge that is presented in the book *ALLATRA* and in general in the books of Anastasia Novik, in the books Sensei, and thanks to videos with Igor Mikhailovich Danilov, and thanks to, a huge movement of volunteers from the international public movement, from *ALLATRA* international public movement, that deal with, this scientific research too. When we talk about this is an energetic structure, that thoughts do not belong to us because they come to us. And, there is clear evidence, reliable evidence on this. So guys, if you doubt this, so please just, please simply take at least an hour of your time, and you will be surprised at how much, there's so much large-scale evidence of this is really so. I mean, this is not just some fantasies of a psychotherapist, and the person who, well, kind of like cannot spend another evening somewhere else on Sunday. But anyway, this conference, just as many other conferences that are held by volunteers and participants of *ALLATRA* International Public Movement, they provide, enormous understanding of why we live the way we live now, and why the consumer format is so aggressive for a human being. Why consciousness and emotions are, of orient nature, and they are toxic elements for every human being. I mean, humans in specific on our planet.
Right, the very knowledge of the human energy structure actually simplifies everything right away. It makes you get rid of any attempts to find explanation of your problems in external situations, because the problem is inside. But the most wonderful thing is the source of happiness is also inside of us. Because I didn't say this, but actually the human energy structure is built around the soul. And the center, the main part of this structure is the soul. This actually this portal, a connection with the world of God. Actually, we have all the misfortune inside of us here, but to the source of happiness. You don't have to run around to look for it. Everything is inside us. And just look how simple everything is. The source of misfortune is emotions, the source of happiness is feelings. That's what makes a person happy. And if we even, take the subject of our today's conversation, there is the syndrome of emotional burnout. But nobody says that there is a syndrome of burnout through feelings, and we will never hear anything like this. But there is a feeling with feelings, replenishment with feelings, because feeling is what fills us with vital energy. This what gives us life in the direct sense of the word, but while emotions is what burns our life out. Look how everything is simple and clear. And just to summarize, I would like to say that yes, feelings is what gives life. Emotions lead to death. In the direct sense, literal meaning of this word, based on the conference which you referred to, Life After Death, Fiction and Facts. Actually, this is a very important event. Psychology, by losing the understanding of the soul, the dual nature of a human, the true meaning of human life. Also, psychology has lost the understanding of what life is and what death is for a human. And the very point is that with the death of the physical body, only existence ends, but not for the human. And many facts have been gathered on this subject at this conference. It's scientific facts. But one of the topics which was also discussed at this conference in May, I think that it concerns and worries everyone, and every person would like to figure it out. It was discussed what hell and heaven are. And it turns out that heaven and hell are not some particular places, but it's a state, a condition in which a person can be. And this condition, this state is actually determined by what we are filled with. Whether we have this, when we have this state of heaven, it's when we are filled with feelings, but the state of hell is when we are filled with negative emotions. And the whole point is that this very main choice, major choice is the point of a human life. Somebody might think, what about emotions? Why it's so important to talk about this? But why important? Because this is directly connected with the major meaning of human life. It relates to the topic of heaven and hell, life and death. Because the choice in which condition to be, a person chooses either life filled with life and happiness, or a person chooses tormenting death, which will be later, after the death of a physical body, because the real death is afterwards. That's what is important. That is why it's very important to figure all this out. And also this choice is made in every second, every moment of a person's life. Whatever we accumulate more during our earthly existence, if we choose to be in feelings or emotions, that's the end, the outcome we will have. That's what is important to know and understand. To understand what emotions and feelings are, where the sources of both of them is, and how we should choose between emotions and feelings. That's the vitally important determinant choice for every person. That's what I would like to mention today.
Thank you very much, because right now, this is what can be said, I understood. I get the memory surfaced to me when you spoke about the state of hell and heaven. There was a saying of the ancient sages that heaven and hell person carries in himself. It wasn't clear before this point, before our conversation. Somehow it just passed by, or it was like considered some kind of religious philosophical views. Patience, but unfortunately modern society today neglects the wisdom and the knowledge of ancient scientists, and the knowledge of sages who supposedly seem primitive, but nevertheless behind this simple phrase, that a human being carries heaven and hell inside himself, everything is said there. And really, when you realize, when you know, first of all, about the dual nature of a human being, and thanks to you, again, about those accents, about those focuses that you have said during our conversation, because, again, we have talked from the point of view of dual nature of a human being. There is soul, there is personality, there is consciousness, there are thoughts, but the main thing is there are feelings, and when there are feelings, then there is God in the life of a person.
Yes, and then there is happiness and joy in a person's life. And actually, for this very answer, people come to psychiatrists or psychologists. A person is looking for happiness, while we eliminate the main source of this happiness from science and try to lead a person to this happiness. It's impossible. That is why we have so many problems and we have this burning out of our vital energy. So, no, there is no point. It's impossible to come to happiness without God.
Thank you. Well then. So, in general, I would like to say thank you to all the viewers. Diana, to you. Thank you for this live broadcast. I hope that the topic of emotional burnout can be closed. But guys, we will consider this, from the questions and the comments that you wrote. Maybe there are some things that are not clear. So again, under descriptions of every video, you can watch it later, and it will be on YouTube a little further. And there is an email of the project. So right there, if there are some questions, we will gladly reveal, open them, because indeed to learn the truth together is much more interesting. So in conclusion, I would like to say the following, that a human being is actually considered a mystery for modern science. We have focused on external shell. We have confused ourselves in simple topics without getting to the complex one. We've mixed feelings and emotions. We combine the functionality of consciousness and the brain. We have given health qualities to the organs and systems of our body, but everything is so simple and clear. The body is just a part of the construction of the human being. A human being is unique in himself as a being, as an essence, because he is a carrier of the soul. The soul is a divine spark. And our main task, our main purpose as a human being is to preserve this in ourselves, so that every person could fulfill his soul purpose in his life. And this goal is, this purpose is to live. Guys, stay tuned, and please, in conclusion of our live broadcast, please watch this fragment from the video Truth and Chat with Igor Mikhailovich Danilov. Thank you.
That heaven means a state, and by what means is it possible to bring out of this state?
Naturally, heaven is exactly a state. When a person is in heaven, or to put it simply, during this temporary life, while staying here, he begins to live. Already by the spiritual world, he has heaven. I mean, when he's full of love for Allah, for God, or whatever we call him, love for that one, and eternal. When he is overfilled and he is a single whole with that world, it is heaven for him. But when he stumbles through temptations from Iblis, he gets out of this state, and it turns out that a person leads himself astray from the path to life eternal and brings himself out of the state of heaven. Then there is everything: bitterness, sadness, and misunderstanding of this world. And although the world becomes multicolored, but with the dominance of what is gray and sad, then shadows appear inside him, in which all these creatures live, which kill him. But when a person lives by feelings, sincere feelings, you see, we return to a feeling, by the feeling of love, sincere love for Allah, for the spiritual world, he himself becomes this love. Well, what is heaven? Well, heaven is exactly love.
God's love.
Of course. And if he lives only by this, Iblis cannot lead him astray. Well, again, it's our choice. We implement what we choose. A person is free in his choice. It's his right, given to him by God, to choose life or to choose death.